Hello there and welcome back to Chef Mel's Kitchen. So what we're making today is a shepherdess's pie. And what is a shepherdess's pie, I hear you ask, virtually. So a shepherd's pie is made with lamb mince because that's what a shepherd does. A shepherd is in charge of looking after sheep, looking after lambs. A cottage pie is basically the same thing, but it's made with beef mince instead of lamb mince. A lot of people ask me why isn't it called a cowherd's pie, if it's a shepherd's pie? And the reason why I looked into this is because people that looked after the cows, that looked after the farm, the sort of farmers, they often lived in cottages. So there's that connection there. There's also the fact that shepherd's pie and cottage pie were considered sort of poor man's food, and the poor people were the ones that lived in cottages, hence the whole cottage pie thing. So what's a shepherdess's pie then? So a shepherdess's pie is the vegetarian version. I don't know why making it vegetarian makes it female. I don't know, that's a little bit sexist. I did watch something recently about the masculine femininity of food and how sexism in society, how, girls, we eat salads and we eat alfalfa sprouts and tofu, and men eat burgers and steaks and ribs. And of course that's absolute nonsense, because as all of my students will know, and anyone that knows me, I like pies and I like steaks, and I can eat just as much manly food as the rest of them. So instead of the lamb mince, instead of the beef mince, because this is a vegetarian dish, the form the protein is going to take is in the form of green lentils. Right, so I told you we had a lot of ingredients here. It's actually a really cheap meal to make, but there's just lots of bits and bobs. So I'll start with the base. I'll start with the sort of pie base. So you will need, I would say, one large red onion. I say one large, these are three incredibly, I'll use my hand for scale, but three incredibly small red onions. So one red onion, 2 carrots and 2 celery sticks, and you're going to really finely dice them, They're going to be sweated down in 2 tablespoons of sunflower oil. And then you will need 250 grams of chestnut mushrooms, again really finely chopped. You're sort of recreating that sort of mince sort of texture. You'll need half a teaspoon of garlic granules, and you'll need sort of a nice big sprig of rosemary chopped finely, or you can use a teaspoon of dried rosemary. You will then need 100 millilitres of red wine. You will need, this is a vegetable stock cube. Remember, you're doing it vegetarian, so you need to make it a veg stock cube, which will turn into 700 millilitres of stock. But a little sneaky ingredient, you might have noticed this, you can choose not to add it if you want, because I know Marmite is famously love or hate. But this is a trick that my mum taught me, because my mum's vegetarian, and if you ever want vegetarian food to be really flavoursome, not be bland, taste really strong and savoury and lovely, add Marmite to it, because it just adds that beautiful sort of umami savoury flavour. So in with the stock, in with 700 ml stock, we're going to add a teaspoon of Marmite as well. But that is optional. If you don't like it, don't add it. Simple. 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, and again that's to improve the richness and darkness of the main sort of lentil mixture. These are the main event. 2 tins of green lentils. So those have already been cooked and they're stored in water. If you can't get any tinned lentils and you can only get dried, instead of 2 tins, I would use 300 grams of dried lentils. I would soak them overnight and then I'd cook them for 30 minutes before using in this recipe. So that's all the ingredients you'll need for the sort of base of it. For the topping, it's just sort of mash really. You need 1.2 kilos of potatoes, which I'm going to peel and dice. You'll need, and this is a lot of butter, 80 grams. Actually, I know it's quite a lot, but if you want nice mash, add lots of butter. 80 grams of butter, about 100 ml of semi-skimmed milk. And then for a nice luxury topping, I've got about 60 grams of breadcrumbs here, and I'm going to use 100 grams of mature cheddar to make a nice cheesy crispy top. Oh yes, and just a little bit of parsley just for sprinkling on at the end as a garnish. So there you go, phew, that's all the ingredients. So on a medium heat, add 2 tablespoons of oil and the finely chopped onion, celery and carrot, and I want you to sweat this down for 10 minutes. Now you can add your finely chopped mushrooms. And you can add your rosemary and your garlic granules. And then you need to cook that down again for another 5 minutes. So now I'm going to add my lentils, which I've just drained and rinsed. And I've realised that I maybe should have used a larger pan, but I think it would just about fit. Fingers crossed. Add my 2 tins of lentils, drained and rinsed. I'm going to add my wine, red wine, and I'm going to add balsamic vinegar. And I'm just going to let that bubble away just for 1 or 2 minutes, just to burn the alcohol off the red wine. Now you just need to add your stock and your Marmite, so that's going to go in. And I knew it would just about fit, just about. And that is 700 ml of stock that I've made with 1 vegetable stock cube and a generous teaspoon of Marmite. So now I'm going to turn that on to low, and I'm going to cook that low and slow, stew it down for an hour. After 1 hour you can see that it's reduced down and the vegetables and lentils are all soft. If you can see me moving that spoon there should still be a nice amount of juice in there, because that's important, because once we top it with potato and bake it in the oven, the potatoes will soak up some of the liquid and it will sort of evaporate as it's baking. So I'm just going to transfer that to a large pie dish now. So as you can see, I've transferred it to a nice big pie dish and I just smoothed it down. And then if I take you over to the hob, I've got a big pan of boiling water, boiling salted water, and ready for my potatoes to go in. So I'm just going to add my potatoes now, and they're probably going to splash everywhere. There we go, lovely. And that needs to not parboil, needs to boil for about 25 minutes. So I've drained the potatoes and returned them to the pan. I've just melted the butter in the microwave because I just find that if it's melted, it tends to incorporate into the mash better. So there's the melted butter, quite a lot of it, but that's the secret to good mash, is lots of butter. That's a little chef thing. And I'm just going to add a splash of milk as well. I don't want sloppy mash, but I want enough that I can smooth it over nicely. And then I've got my masher. If you want perfectly, oh, and I'll add seasoning as well. Got some salt. I will check seasoning as well. And a bit of pepper. If you want perfectly smooth mash, I recommend, if you've got the funds, to buy something called a ricer, which is almost like, if you've seen garlic presses, it's almost like that, but for potatoes, and it goes through. So it's going to be easier for me to do this two-handed, but basically mash your mash until it's completely nice and smooth. Right, I've put the mash on top of my base, and now I'm just going to smooth over the mash. So there are 2 ways of doing this. There is an extra schmancy, that's a word I've just made up, but there's an extra fancy way of doing it, which you could, if you wanted to, pipe the mash on top. So you'd wait until the mash was a little bit cooler, and then you'd put the mash into a piping bag, and then you'd pipe lots of little, it's a bit time consuming, but it can look quite nice. Especially if you're doing this for a dinner party, you can do like little individual ones and pipe the topping on, and that looks quite cute. But actually, in terms of not, style over substance, I actually prefer, I actually prefer doing it this way, because I'll just show you in a minute. You get these beautiful ridges if you do it like this. Show you what I like to do for a really crispy result. So, see what I'm doing with the fork there? I'm going to make lots of nice, wiggly sort of lines. And what that's going to do is that's going to crisp up really nicely in the oven. And I think you get a crispier result doing this than if you actually pipe it. So we're just going to top it now. So put your breadcrumbs in a bowl and put your cheddar in a bowl and just mix up just briefly together in your hands, and that helps the dryness and the fat sort of mix together. And we're going to sprinkle that liberally, generously over that pie. And when that goes into the oven, that's going to go really nice and crispy and melty. And those ridges we made with that fork, that's going to help create these beautiful crispy layers onto that shepherd's pie. So a little bit more. And I always end up putting up too much topping, but It's like the best bit, isn't it? It's like the best bit on a lasagna, for instance, is that crispy bit on the top. One of my friends said their best bit on a lasagna was they always wanted the corner bit, the really crispy corner bit. Right, so that goes in the oven for 50 minutes. So after 50 minutes, I've taken that out of the oven, and doesn't that look absolutely gorgeous? I'm just going to finish off with a little sprinkly bit of parsley, and that serves 4 generously. I'm going to serve it with gravy and 3 types of veg because I'm feeling generous. But that's it. So that is it. Lentil Shepherdesses Pie. A bit more. There you go, that's better.